So my intervention is the Morphosyntax intervention, and the people associated with it are Ann Tyler and Allison Haskill. This approach targets preschool children ages 3 to 6 who have a speech sound disorder and expressive language impairment, which is characterized by morphosyntactic difficulties. These children need to have an MLU of 2 to be a prime candidate for this approach. Other populations with morphosyntactic impairments may also be candidates. Although preschool age range is ideal, other children with developmental delays or English language learners may also benefit from this intervention. Children should have expressive language level of Brown stage 2 for them to benefit from this intervention. The targets are past tense ED, uncontractable and contractible copula B verbs, regular third person singular, and irregular past tense. It's important that these children are linguistically ready and cognitively ready before doing this intervention. The children for which this intervention was designed for, I thought this was interesting. They all performed below 1 standard deviation, less than the mean on a standardized expressive language measure. So for the philosophy of the approach, the theoretical rationale for this intervention targets finite morphemes and cross-domain generalizations. So finite morphemes such as third person singular, as in the S in she runs, reflect tense and agreement. Also, both copula and auxiliary be forms like is, are, am, was, and were. Studies show that preschoolers with speech language impairment perform poorly on these morphemes in comparison to non-finite ones. So basically, during this approach, there's a major focus on finite morphology because those seem to be more difficult for those who have a speech language impairment to perform versus those non-finite ones. As for cross-domain generalizations, that is highly focused during this intervention because it's important to have both the phonology aspect as well as the morphosyntax. So basically, morphosyntactic intervention has the assumption that there are multiple interactions among developing linguistic domains and that they may be maximized during intervention to extend beyond the domain targeted. So we want to target both phonology and morphosyntax at the same time because the goal of this approach is for children with both speech sound disorders and morphosyntactically based language impairment to achieve cross-domain improvement in both phonology and morphosyntax. So that's a big focus and philosophy of this approach. As for the methods, this approach was formed to have one individual in one small group session per week, with the individual being generally 30 minutes and 45 minutes for the group session. A cycles approach can be used for these sessions by targeting speech sound goals 1 week and having the next week target morphosyntax. This was the approach that was used for the study on this intervention. But another option is to use a block strategy where speech or morphosyntax is targeted for 3 1-month cycles. And a third option may be to focus on both speech and morphosyntax during each session. However, studies show this to be very minimally effective, so would not recommend. This approach includes naturalistic production and practice opportunities for children. So very naturalistic approach. A facilitation technique commonly used with this intervention is focused stimulation. This is where the facilitator, which could be a parent, a teacher, or the clinician, SLP, um, they will provide many relevant examples of a specific linguistic form that they're trying to target. So, for example, the book that I got all this information out of said that singing Itsy Bitsy Spider to teach past tense ed. So you would say, washed the spider out and climbed up the wall and dried up all the rain, um, and really emphasize those as you say them and kind of model that past tense ed form. And so you can do that with all different forms of morphosyntax, whatever the target is. Another technique that can be used in addition to focus stimulation is to have production practice or elicited production. This is to work on the speech sounds that the child is struggling with the most, whichever ones they're struggling with. As the child progresses through this intervention, the level of complexity increases for the elicited production as the clinician support decreases. Overall, I think this is a great approach to for children with both speech sound disorders and morphosyntactically based language impairments. I think that it does a good job at targeting both at the same time because you're not always going to get a kid who just has speech sound disorder or a kid who only struggles with morphosyntax. So speech and language often go hand in hand, and this is a great intervention to use if you run into an individual who has who qualifies for this intervention. So that is it for my presentation. Thank you for listening.